Asato ma satgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya aviravirmayedhi rudra yatte dakshinam mukham tena mang pahi nityam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness unto light, from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.
This devotional song is written by Sharat Chandra Chakraborty. The meaning in English: you are Brahman, O Ramakrishna. You are Krishna, you are Ram. You are the supreme goal of all spiritual seekers. You are the formless Brahman. You came to this earth in human form, who is pure, conqueror of lust and gold. Your compassion is limitless. You are supreme, friends of the poor. Tumi Brahma Rama Krishna, Tumi Krishna, Tumi Ram, Tumi Brahma Rama Krishna, Tumi Krishna, Tumi Ram, Tumi Vishnu, Tumi Jishnu Prabhu, Vishnu Pranara, Tumi Brahma Rama Krishna, Tumi Krishna, Tumi Ram, Tumi Vishnu, Tumi Jishnu Prabhu, Vishnu Pranaram, Tumi Brahma Rama Krishna, Tumi Adhe O Adhara, Tumi Brahma Nirakara, Tumi Adhe O Adhara, Tumi Brahma Nirakara, Tumi Nara Rupa Dhara, Tumi Nara Rupa Dhara, Vijay to Kanaka Kam, Tumi Brahma Rama Krishna, Tumi Krishna, Tumi Ram, Tumi Vishnu, Tumi Jishnu Prabhu, Vishnu Pranara, Tumi Brahma Rama Krishna, Aparo Karuna Sindhu, Tumi Natha Dina Bandhu, Aparo Karuna Sindhu, Tumi Natha Dina যাচে ইন্দু কৃপা বিন্দু, যাচে ইন্দু কৃপা বিন্দু, চরণে করি প্রণাম। তুমি ব্রহ্ম রাম কৃষ্ণ, তুমি কৃষ্ণ, তুমি রাম, তুমি বিষ্ণু, তুমি জিষ্ণু, প্রভু বিষ্ণু প্রাণারাম। তুমি ব্রহ্ম রাম কৃষ্ণ, তুমি ব্রহ্ম রাম কৃষ্ণ, তুমি ব্রহ্ম রাম কৃষ্ণ।
I'm reading from an editorial from Prabhupada Bharata, May 2024 edition. It's titled Hinduism in Living Up to the Expectations of the Buddha. I'll read a couple sections from it. Buddha's was a religion of means. He gave no importance to the goal in his philosophy. Although his philosophy led one to freedom, freedom itself was not defined as an essence of some being. In Hinduism, freedom is held to be the real nature of our being, called Atman or Brahman, which is pre-existing. On the other hand, Buddha did not establish himself to be a god or an avatar of some external divine being. Even his biographers are vocal about his claiming no godhood for himself. One of them says, among the founders of religions, the Buddha was the only teacher who did not claim to be other than the human being, pure and simple, man and his own master, and there is no higher being or power that sits in judgment over his own destiny. So, from where was a light to be found that could shatter the spiritual darkness? Buddha said, be your own light unto yourself, Atma Dipo Bhava. As for Buddha's sermons, he asked his disciples to treat them as a raft we use to row the boat. After the journey is over, we forsake it. Forsake my words by all means, said Buddha. He was so much in favor of making a system of religion that required no God to look up to. We have certain impurities. We feel insecure and in bondage. This implies we have to act on them. That is all it is. His was a religion of action and not of devotion or knowledge. He attributed all his realization, attainments, and achievements to human endeavor and human intelligence. It seems he was bent upon making this world itself, the man itself, the other God. In his religion, the necessary expansion of heart came not from an all-pervading God, but from compassion which could deluge the entire universe under its expansion. Ah, such was Buddha's love. Against the oppression by a few, wherever in human civilization there is an impulse of taking charge of the situation in one's own hand, thereby getting on one's own feet, that can easily be traced back to Buddha. Whether that be electoral democracy, pedestrian economy, or solving the problems of the world with its own inherent and infailing energy and resources with the help of science and technology, all can be traced to the character of Buddha. A certain favorite city of Buddha, Dhana Janapada, which he visited the most, was practicing democracy long before India became a democratic country. Such was the influence of the Buddha in Vaishali Janapada, which is in present-day Bihar. The other section from this editorial, a clue into the denial of Buddha. the editor says, unlike the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which is a true record of actual conversation, there is a book called Devijja Sutta in the traditions of Buddhism. It does not depict an actual conversation of the Buddha. Nevertheless, it is considered an authentic scripture. It comes under Pali canon. Through its pages, one can trace what it means to deny the Vedas. There, Buddha is shown engaged in dialogue with two Brahmanas. His arguments are structured in 5 parables. 2 among them are the most beautiful woman in the land and the stairway to nowhere. With the help of these 2 parables, we will try to figure out what did Buddha mean by denying the Vedas. I'll read one of them. The first parable suggests, suppose a man says he's in love with the most beautiful woman of the country. One can question, have you seen that woman? Or do you know where she lives? If not, what is the point in saying that you're in love with that woman? Why do you say she is your all in all? Through the second parable, which we will not read here, and the first parable, the editor concludes, in short, the 2 parables reverberate 2 inquiries. Have you seen God? And do you have the necessary means to see God? If not, what gives you the authority to uphold Vedas? Clearly, the Buddha did not mean to deny the Vedas, but he was in dialogue with the Brahmanas of his time, their authoritative traditions that had degraded. From the antiquity of time, these 2 questions kept reverberating until the soul of Hinduism was stirred to give a suitable response. That too from the mouth of a humble Brahmana, which he's referring to Sri Ramakrishna. Buddha's expectations had hit the mark. Never again these questions would go unanswered. Here ends the reading.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhetamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So 2 weeks back we had the Buddha Purnima, and we really haven't discussed Buddha at length since then. So today the topic is Buddha, no cobwebs in the brain. So we'll have to, this is actually a part of a quote of a statement by Vivekananda himself. So I'll start with that quotation, where it fits into, and we'll go on. So this is from Vivekananda. What I like most in that man, meaning the Buddha, is that among all the prophets of mankind, here was a man who never had any cobwebs in his brain. This is the statement. And who was sane and strong. When kingdoms were at his feet, he was still the same man, maintaining, I am a man amongst men. No claim for divinity, mind. He gives a flip side to it. Buddha made the fatal mistake of thinking that the whole world could be lifted to the height of the Upanishads. But Buddha would have no compromise. The world before now has seen even the avatara ruined by compromise, tortured to death for want of recognition and lust. But Buddha would have been worshipped as God in his own lifetime all over Asia for a moment's compromise. And his reply was only, Buddhahood is an achievement, not a person. Verily was he the only man in the world who was ever quite sane, the only sane man ever born. So, by this cobwebs in the brain, no cobwebs in the brain, and his Vivekananda's emphasis on sanity, I think it's today, particularly in this context, when we are going back to the Buddha Jayanti 2 weeks back and trying to elaborate on this particular theme of the Buddha's life, question comes up, what exactly does this no cobwebs, what exactly does this sanity mean for us? So I'll give a tentative answer. We'll elaborate on that, and then I think it would be appropriate if each of us thinks about this on his or her own. Does this sanity or lack of cobwebs, firstly, mean nihilism, mean anarchism, where, there is nothing you need to believe in and do whatever you like? I don't think that's what is meant by sanity or nihilism at all. See, the human existence is a bundle of contradictions. See, why? Basically because we have this instrument of thought, namely our brains and our feelings. But on the other hand, what does that try to do? It tries to put a structure, tries to comprehend the world, tries to comprehend one's own position in the world. And this understanding by nature is mostly inadequate. If it was adequate, then we would have stopped struggling to make sense of our surroundings. This happens both at an individual level and at a collective level. At an individual level, it basically gives rise to these aspirations which are, in some sense, global, for the good, the truth, true, and the beautiful. Yeah? What we in Sanskrit call Satchitananda. That aspiration is there, and we try to see it reflected in the world around us. Invariably, there are contradictions, and we see that, there is good and bad, there is the true and the false, there is the beautiful and the ugly. And so, as soon as we have an aspiration for some higher values, their opposites abound in the world around us, and it's something that basically gives rise to these conflicts, confusions, etc., etc. So, what exactly does sanity mean? It's basically a commitment to truth and a lack of confusion. Yeah? So essentially, since we are talking about the Buddha, and I think this is pointed out in the editorial, often I think Buddha is described mistakenly by some people as a materialist. Vivekananda quotes that and says, but I think that should be taken with a pinch of salt and a qualifier. Perhaps the better way to describe him is as an empiricist, as opposed to a materialist. What does empiricist mean? Basically, it means you start off by your own observations, empirical observations. And really, and this is where I think the sanity lies, all of us really do that. But instead, we have this world around us, we look at it, we think of it, but derive this first impulse of knowledge, of information, through this empirical observation. Wherein lies the absence of confusion? Asking ourselves, yes, well, I am seeing this, but am I seeing it right? Am I seeing it in truth? Or is my vision colored? Is my vision colored by my personal prejudices, ways of thinking, etc., etc.? So, right now, with the internet available to us in our pockets or in our hands, so it's very easy to find all these sources of optical illusion. That's something, you just search for optical illusions and then you have this whole bunch of pictures that are available. So just yesterday, someone had forwarded. It's essentially, so here's the thing, I think and when we indulge in this, in a use of this optical illusion pretty often. So for example, even in this comic strip, Asterix and Obelix, yeah? So I think many of us, our generation and generations before us, we grew up reading that. So it's originally French, but I think all of us have, many of us have read it in English. So essentially Obelix, who is extremely stout, likes wearing shirts which have vertical stripes. Yeah? And then there is somebody who comes along who's wearing a t-shirt with horizontal stripes, and he is extremely amused by it. He says, and then he says, oh, everybody knows it's only vertical stripes that are slimming. So why is this the case? So essentially what happens is that vertical stripes convey to us this optical impression that the person is more long than broad. Yeah? Whereas if it's horizontal stripes, then that side, the horizontal side gets emphasized, and a person looks stouter than one is. Yeah? So essentially, this is the way our eyes function. And and it's only relatively recently meaning over the last couple of decades, that the human eye, which is a wonder of evolution, and its method of gaining knowledge have been understood more and more clearly. So for instance, there are neurons, these are specialized neurons which detect motion. There are specialized neurons which detect edges. So let me just give you one example. So for example, when we are, again, children, so you'll have this one little square which has a picture of some landscape in it with lots of bushes, trees, etc., etc. And then you will be asked, find 4 cats in the picture. Yeah? And then children can do that, but they play around and then they finally detect oh, here's one cat, here's another, etc., etc. 10 years back, if you gave this same problem to a computer, it would fail miserably. Why? Because the algorithm was not yet ready. Because we had not found out what is it in our eyes that detects hidden patterns. Yeah? So essentially what one is doing there, what our eyes do, is it takes certain features of the cat, certain lines on the cat which mark out the boundary of the cat. It scans rapidly the picture and first asks whether these things are there. On the other hand, if you take a naive way of looking at various things, so then what would a computer do? It would convert the picture into pixels, which means basically little pieces of, elementary pieces of data, and those would be coded by either a 0 or a 1, the binary coding that computers use. And then it's going to scan this whole thing, whole huge amount of data, and ask whether a particular pattern occurs or not. That's a very expensive algorithm. Our eyes do not function like that. If we try to do that, then in order to, see, here's a simple thing. If one looks at this side wall, without a moment's thought, you say, okay, this is a wall, and we don't even think twice about it. But expect if somebody does not know about it and starts recognizing it by scanning it from the top left to the bottom right, and then finally saying, oh yes, this is a wall, how much time would it take? So pretty clearly, this is not the way we evolved as a species to recognize the world around us. And so essentially, even to find an effective algorithm for detection, we need to introspect as a species to even understand how is it that our eyes, which belongs to all of us, is capable of recognizing various things in the world around us. And then in order to understand that process, it can't be, okay, people with eyes born north of 30-degree latitude. Yeah? I mean, this kind of arbitrary restriction of species will not be done. Why? Basically, the idea that is implicit in this investigation is that what is the common process through which human beings try to understand the world around us? Because at the end of the day, what is understood is that this process of inquiry into trying to understand how our eyes see the universe, the benefit of that, once you pass it on to a machine, is something that should be globally available. And this kind of scientific inquiry, we often think, I mean, so this is where I think when we say somebody or so-and-so is a materialist, we often attribute implicitly, though not explicitly, a certain lack of values and a certain absence of values, and that is a certain package which is mindlessly and unthinkingly associated with this word. This is the reason why one should prefer, one prefers to use a less loaded term like empiricism. Why? Because empiricism does come with a certain pair of values. What are those values? One, that this inquiry that we are performing is supposed to lead to this one value called truth. Why? This inquiry is basically aimed at finding what is true about the way we perceive the world. In this particular case, when we are trying to study the eye, that is what one is doing. What is universal, ergo true, about the process by which we understand the world. So empiricism is not divorced from values. It is based on two values, one of which is exactly this, namely this commitment to truth. The second value is essentially what is in the Platonic triad is what's called the good. Why is that the case? I mean, essentially it's, see, the thing is these three values, the good, the true, the beautiful, have given rise to three higher human endeavors all over. The quest for truth is embodied largely in science or the scientific method. The quest for the beautiful is basically embodied in the artistic endeavors, the search for art, and the quest for good is finally embodied in what we broadly call social work or service. Yeah? These are not separate from each other. So where does the good come into this inquiry? Essentially, the benefits of such an inquiry, and this is really one of the motives behind an inquiry into trying to understand how the I perceives the world, the benefits of such an inquiry should be available to all. Yeah? So this principle, at least in principle, in practice it will take time, but at least in principle, the benefits of an inquiry are supposed to be available to all, is where this good comes in. And now coming back to the life of the Buddha where we started and we've made a longish detour, it is these two simple-minded empiric values that are there in empiricism that pervade his life. What is the part of no cobwebs? What he does not do is bring in extraneous sources or sources of authority. And it is here that this statement is that he refuses to arrogate to himself a position, something that is superhuman in some sense or the other. Not superior to anybody else. This equality is there, coupled with this deep commitment to truth and the benefits of his inquiry into truth. This is always in a context. So a particular context is something he was inquiring into. We'll come to that a bit later. But the benefits of that inquiry were supposed to be for all. Yeah? So in that sense, we should describe Buddha as an empiricist with this twin commitment. One, a commitment to truth above everything else, one. Two, the benefits of that inquiry to be made available to all. Okay. So, since we are in the Vedanta Society, I think it's important that we also give a Vedantic reading of this same two aspects. So how is it that, see, the thing is, philosophical schools keep on fighting about very little things like, well, this word should have been used in this way or this word should have been used in that way, and polemical texts are written. Most of it is very often very esoteric, without trying to address the central issue. Look, these discussions are supposed to have something concrete in their output, which is essentially this problem of how do we lead our lives. This is the empirical problem that is to be led. We face problems in our day-to-day lives. How do we address them? And how does this thinking, how does this cogitation lead to an effective means of addressing that practical issue? And very often these intellectual cogitations, polemical discussions, go off without really keeping itself tied down to this understanding that, look, at the end of the day, after you have gone through all these polemical discussions, the output should be something that leads to a better way of handling these issues. So there have been quibbles about, and whenever you have some such philosophical debate, very often it's a straw man argument that is brought up. Straw man argument in the sense that one consciously or unconsciously misinterprets the opposition's position by converting it into something which is patently ridiculous or dubious, and then one starts arguing about against that misinterpretation and then goes on fighting and then says finally, oh no, you guys are false, we are true. Missing the point altogether. And then of course, so what exactly happens here? So for instance, there are discussions, polemical discussions, which frankly, I think it's not worth one's time. But let me just summarize. So the polemical discussions between Vedanta and Buddhism is that the Vedanta and its surrounding philosophies accuse Buddhism of being nihilistic, and Buddhism basically argues back and say, you guys think of the Atman as a thing. It's not a thing. Therefore, calling it as something is also ridiculous. So essentially, this is a one-line summary of the argument. As such, it means nothing. Why? What one is doing is basically trying to actively misinterpret the opposition's position, and then because why is there this polemical fight? Because finally, at the end of the day, if you say, oh, we are talking about the same thing, we are just trying to use language to point to something that is not entirely captured within language, then we say, oh, my philosophical school and this whole contraption that I have built up, it starts collapsing. Yeah? And this little tribe I have built up, this is an intellectual tribe. Yeah? So the intellectual tribe is basically, we belong to this particular school, which belongs to this supreme reality is. Yeah? And then, no, we belong to this thing, and we cannot say that the supreme reality is, etc., etc. Yeah? So it's really at a certain level, at an intellectual level, it's basically what we are doing. I mean, this is just a facetious comment, so you should not take it literally. It's basically we are going back to the time our nearest neighbor in terms of species, the chimpanzees, would basically go, I mean, there would be one tribe of chimpanzees staying in one place, going to a nearby tribe, beating them up, and maybe eating up some of them, and then coming back. It's really that what is happening, and I don't think it's something that really is beneficial for somebody who's a serious inquirer. Because at the end of the day, really these two schools of philosophy are really talking about the same thing. And I think there are benefits of studying both, because there are certain aspects which are dealt with in much greater detail in one than the other. And I think both of these have their positions. Or if one likes, one of them appeals to one more, then just pick that up, that's it. So from the point of view of Vedanta, how do we understand this? And we'll emphasize the similarities, not these silly superficial differences. So Shankara, in fact, I think Vivekananda talks about this in his lectures, that a large number of conclusions of Advaita Vedanta have been taken from Madhyamaka, the school of Buddhism, which was started in the 1st century of AD by one philosopher from Andhra Pradesh, Nagarjuna. This is a very famous philosopher. I mean, these two are probably the greatest Indian philosophers of yore. Shankara on the one hand, and Shankara in the 8th century, and Nagarjuna in the 1st century AD. The system of logic in Advaita Vedanta, which dwells to a great extent on linguistic precision, a lot of it was really borrowed from this. So much so that Shankara's teacher's teacher, Gaudapada, was described by the more theistic, dualistic schools as a crypto-Buddhist, as a hidden Buddhist. Apparently that was an insult. I think I think those connotations have now vanished. But so let's go back to Shankara's Adhyasa Bhashya, which is the introduction to the Brahma Sutras. And the crucial idea, the crucial concept, where he addresses this existential issue of lack of clarity, of confusion, of a only a partial commitment to truth. He gives it a name. He calls it adhyasa. So it's something where one particular thing is, qualities of something are superimposed on another thing, and the two are confused together, conflated together, and this confusion is referred to by one of these two contradictory terms. So for example, so what is more specifically what? So it basically says that there is this conscious element in us. It is in and through that we do see, feel, everything. On the other hand, there is the world which is the other. So he is basically stressing the fact that something which is fairly commonsensical, that whenever we act in the world, whenever we think or do or speak in the world, there is this subject and there is an object of any experience, and that which mediates between them is the experience of the object by the subject. All our life is really built around this trichotomy. And this simple underlying fact is not something we investigate further. It is something that we assume is essential for all knowledge, for all understanding, and just go forth without investigating this basic framework through which we think, we feel, we do. And therefore, the process or the investigation is into this trichotomy to isolate what exactly this subject means. What is the reality of the subject? Because once we start investigating, if we start investigating the object, what is going to be the output of it? It is going to be some knowledge of the object. But where is that knowledge going to lie? It is going to be in the subject itself. It is the subject, that means us, who will have a greater understanding of the object, the world. Yeah? So he decides what exactly is this subjective understanding? What is the subject? That's what he inquires into. And so the process, so this, he says basically that I am this body and this body is me. This, or I am the part of this world and the world is part of me. This confusion is what is at the root of all our problems. Remove that or analyze it and try and essentially tie it to one's will. So basically this analysis is something that we can go on doing endlessly. But where it gets tied to the subject, that's called the will. Yeah? So essentially that's how he talks about it, dhriti. Yeah? So if there is a commitment, so it's a similar set of values, commitment to truth about the subject is what is guiding this inquiry. So the tool that cuts through is this analysis or viveka, and that which fuels it is this fearless commitment to truth. And it is in these two values that we see a marked similarity with the Buddhist inquiry. So in that sense, Vedanta on the one hand and this Buddhism on the other, in its pure empirical emphasis, they're not particularly different from each other. So Vivekananda, let's go back to Vivekananda, and he says, so what are the cobwebs that have been thrown away? The cobwebs that have been thrown away is not by saying that these don't exist. It's by saying basically, don't waste your time on this. Yeah? So what is it that we are basically, this focused inquiry, what does it do? It essentially does away with or de-emphasizes all the mythological creatures that we clutter our heads with. Yeah? So this is how the way Vivekananda describes it. See the sanity of the man. He keeps emphasizing the word sane. I mean, we use the word sane to mean something very commonplace. Vivekananda is using the word sane as something as if it's the highest value that can be inculcated. See the sanity of the man. No gods, no angels, no demons, nobody. Nothing of the kind. Stern, sane, every brain cell perfect and complete, even at the moment of death. No delusion. I do not agree with many of his doctrines, you may not. But in my opinion, oh, if I had only one drop of that strength. So, essentially what is happening is, and this is, I think, has been referred to earlier. See, the Upanishadic inquiry does a similar thing. It gives the products of inquiry without any obfuscation, in pretty austere terms. But then our minds very often love to have this narrative making, story making. Yeah? Particularly, oh, there's the good and the bad, and they must fight each other, and then there must all be this blood and gore and all that sort of stuff. So how do we incorporate our social lives into that? And so in order to package these truths, and that happens in all traditions. So in the Upanishadic tradition, this is what gave rise to these Puranic stories, Itihasas, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Vishnu Puran, 15 Purans, 18 Purans, whatever. And so what was the idea? The idea was you package these truths so that it's one little morsel of truth in maybe a full chapter. So you really have to go through all that and then detect one of these things. Why? Because it packages it in the form of a story that is somehow naturally appealing to us. The problem arises when, without paying emphasis to what that story is supposed to communicate, we start inquiring about completely extraneous matters. Did this demon have two heads? If that demon had two heads, so for example, here is a certain joke. So this mythological demon Ravana is supposed to have had 10 heads. So there was this medicine which was supposed to be for headaches. So it basically says that this is a medicine which actually cures headaches on all 10 of Ravana's heads. And so here, there's the other thing that, look, I mean, if somebody has 10 heads and then if one mouth is talking one way and another mouth is talking some other way, how are you going to resolve conflicts between two of these? Anyway, so what is the point of this? Essentially, it's saying that, look, these are mythological stories. Why do you dwell on 10 heads versus one? There's a certain content to it. The problem is that unless that content is packaged, it doesn't appeal to us. Stories appeal to us as naturally as human beings. But it's fine, stories. But Harry Potter is a story which appeals to many of us across all ages. But there is a certain core, raw human courage that has been talked about. That is a certain value. Take it and then stop debating about, well, did they go underneath this particular corridor at such and such time, and did they not? So this obfuscation, this storytelling and narrative making, when it leads to obfuscation of truth, then it becomes irrelevant. So what happens is essentially that this core urge for spiritual life, over time, it gets obfuscated by the human society throwing all this garbage on it in the form of narratives, and then essentially taking the narratives and calling that the religion. This is exactly the reason why that organized religion, churches, people subscribing to this religion against as opposed to another, is falling out of favor wherever societies have developed beyond. Wherever religion is not driven by some fear of the other, and when some basic, say, societal stability has been achieved, people start introspecting and dismissing these accretions as totally inessential. That is the nature of things. So Buddha, what he did at his time, he essentially fought a battle against such accretions so that the core essence could be revitalized. Most of the time what one does, I mean, say for example, we are here, and I think Sri Ramakrishna's, in his life, we find this practice of all religions and this conclusion that all of them lead to the same goal, same core goal. At a certain level, it's commonsensical. Why? Because we are all human beings, and therefore, in the light of whatever investigation has gone on, it is natural that something that is as essential as the core of one's being should not be something that is different, merely dependent on some culture one is born into, some latitude and longitude at which one is born, etc. Yeah? So essentially it is something that is common. On the other hand, we needed somebody to make this commonsensical fact vitally active in our lives. And this is the purpose of these great beings. What they do is not something completely new. It is not something that they have created anew. What they are doing is they are discovering something that is always there and laying a certain emphasis on it so that those of us who come later say, oh yeah, this is it, and we need to lead our lives according to it. That's where the help comes in. So Vivekananda continues, and consider his marvelous brain, no emotionalism. That giant brain never was superstitious. Believe not because an old manuscript has been produced, because it has been handed down to you from your forefathers, because your friends want you to. But think for yourself, search truth for yourself, realize it yourself. Then, if you find it beneficial to one and many, give it to people. Soft-brained men, weak-minded, chicken-hearted, cannot find the truth. One has to be free and as broad as the sky. One has to have a mind that is crystal clear. Only then can truth shine in it. So here, essentially there are two things. One, this dependence on oneself, which Vivekananda keeps on emphasizing. Thinking for oneself, thinking through. So essentially very, very often we are prone to social pressures. Either there's somebody opposing us who will try to frighten us, or then there are our friends and we are afraid of disagreeing and then making them annoyed with us. And then we take their statements without thought and proceed. Oh, so-and-so has said it, it must be. But this emphasis of thinking for oneself is one of the greatest things. It does not mean that you have to disagree every time just for the sake of disagreement. That is this anarchism. That's not the point. But taking that, okay, as a prima facie view, analyzing it, comparing it with one's own experiences, and coming up with a conviction for oneself. Because at the end of the day, what is going to what is going to help us lead our lives are our personal convictions, not the convictions of others. And then, simultaneously, here, commitment to truth. Now the commitment to what Vivekananda called unselfishness is making it available to all. Yeah? So if you find it beneficial to one and many, give it to people. So Vivekananda has quoted this statement. I mean, now again, coming back to the Vedantic perspective on the same ideas. It says, Na ayam atma balahi. This is from the Mundaka Upanishad. Na ayam atma balahina labhya. So this self of one's, basically the essence of one's being, cannot be obtained except through strength. So what exactly is this strength? These are all more or less synonymous ideas, but perhaps it's best to illustrate rather than try to define it, because I think a definition finally is an intellectual statement, but what it means in practice is something more empirical. And since we're talking about Buddha, it's probably better to stress the empirical aspect of things. So we see in Buddha's, there's this statement that he makes when he sits down for meditation at the base of the Bodhi tree, Bodhgaya. Ihasane shushyatu me shariram tvagasthi mamsam pralayancha yatu aprapya bodhim bahukalpa durlabham naiva asanat kayam idam jalishyati. So this is the resolve with which he sits down. What is the resolve? On this seat, so he sits down with this resolve. On this seat, let this body dry and this skin and flesh degenerate without having attained an answer to my query. This body will not move from this seat. This is the resolve. Sri Ramakrishna, in his words, gives an expression to this. One of our former presidents used to describe that, look, the core of this Kathamrita gospel that many of us read, at the core of it is there is just one value. What is it? Sri Ramakrishna calls it Vyakulata, this eagerness for truth. Yeah? This is all that there is. And why does he do it? Why can he talk about it? Because it's authentic in his own life. I mean, there was at a certain point of time when we think that this person is a devotional person, but at the core of that being is that same longing. Yeah? This longing for truth that we find in Buddha expressed in these terms, same thing in Sri Ramakrishna. It's basically saying that without a clear understanding of what is the reality behind this image of Kali that he is worshipping, life is not worth leading. This is where, this is exactly where the devotional angle and this angle and the aspect of analytical inquiry coincide. Why? Because there also it's an ego. These are the questions that he asks. It would sound, if it was not fueled by this desire for truth, it would sound like superficial skepticism. He asks, is this image of the mother that he is worshipping, is there some truth in it, or is it only a poet's imagination? He's asking the same questions that the Buddha is asking here. Essentially, you strip away all these Puranic narratives. What is real about it? And it is here that the devotional inquiry, or the devotional quest, and the analytical inquiry of the Jnani really coincide. And it's here that the similarities, psychological aspect of it, deeper psychological aspects of it, are synthesized. Okay, in the last couple of minutes, you'll say, okay, fine, so we have stressed the truth aspect of things, and but the Buddha is simultaneously known. If it was merely this inquiry into truth, psychologically, not logically, psychologically, it has a tendency to make our minds very dry. If it's just an intellectual inquiry, if it's just an inquiry. So there's a counterpoint to it, which is complementary. Because Vivekananda, on the one hand, he talks about this complete sanity of the person, but at the same time, he talks about the great heart without emotionalism. Yeah? We often conflate love in terms of an emotion, which it is not. It is this capacity to identify with others. Yeah? Empathy. So maybe if we use the word empathy, that would probably be a more appropriate description. And it is this empathy which has led Vivekananda to have these twin ideals for this organization, Atmano Mokshartham Jagat Hitaya Cha. So the first one, for one's own enlightenment or knowledge, and for the good of all. See, on the one hand, truth, on the other hand, goodness, right? So these two cardinal values put together. So what does he, so this, and the cardinal value that it's based on is basically this lack of selfishness, which is what we are forced to do in any kind of service where a larger group of people are concerned. And here's what Vivekananda says: the life of Buddha has an especial appeal. All my life I have been very fond of Buddha. I have more veneration for that character than for any other. That boldness, that fearlessness, and that tremendous love. He was born for the good of men. Others may seek God, others may seek truth for themselves. He did not even care to know truth for himself. He sought truth because people were in misery. How to help them, that was his only concern. Throughout his life, he never had a thought for himself. How can we, ignorant, selfish, narrow-minded human beings, ever understand the greatness of this man? It is this universal feeling of empathy that led Buddha to break down these barriers between peoples of different strata of society, because finally we are in it together. And to conclude, it is precisely this second aspect, this aspect of unselfishness, this commitment to the good of all, that leads to Vivekananda propounding what we call Karma Yoga today. So there, it's not just work, it's mindful work with the understanding that this is a participation in a larger good. And it is this understanding that in and through any work one does, one is participating in a larger unity of human beings, of people, of beings. It is in that unity that good, that the value good is to be found. Yeah? So Karma Yoga really is a pursuit of the good. Yeah? And no better way to conclude than by reading from Vivekananda's rendition of this. And he ties these two things together, the commitment of truth without obfuscation and love of all human beings as part and parcel of one organic reality. To many, the path becomes easier if they believe in God. But the life of Buddha shows that even a man who does not believe in God has no metaphysics, belongs to no sect, and does not go to any church or temple, and is a confessed materialist, even he can attain to the highest. We have no right to judge him. I wish I had one infinitesimal part of Buddha's heart. Buddha may or may not have believed in God. That does not matter to me. He reached the same state of perfection to which others come by bhakti, love of God, yoga, or jnana. Perfection does not come from belief or faith. Talk does not count for anything. Parrots can do that. Perfection comes through the disinterested performance of action. Let me tell you in conclusion a few words about one man who actually carried this teaching of Karma Yoga into practice. That man is Buddha. He is the one man who ever carried this into perfect practice. All the prophets of the world except Buddha had external motives to move them to unselfish action. The prophets of the world, with this single exception, may be divided into two sets. One set holding that they are incarnations of God come down on earth, and the other holding that they are only messengers from God, and both draw their impetus for work from outside. Expect reward from outside, however highly spiritual may be the language they use. But Buddha is the only prophet who said, I do not care to know your various theories about God. What is the use of discussing all the subtle doctrines about the soul? Do good and be good, and this will take you to freedom and to whatever truth there is. He was, in the conduct of his life, absolutely without personal motives. And what man worked more than he? Show me in history one character who has soared so high above all. The whole human race has produced but one such character, such high philosophy, such wide sympathy. This great philosopher, preaching the highest philosophy, yet had the deepest sympathy for the lowest of animals and never put forth any claims for himself. He is the ideal karma yogi, acting entirely without motive, and the history of humanity shows him to have been the greatest man ever born, beyond compare the greatest combination of heart and brain that ever existed, the greatest soul power that has ever been manifested. He is the first great reformer the world has seen. He was the first who dared to say, believe not because some old manuscripts are produced, believe not because it is your national belief, because you have been made to believe it from your childhood, but reason it all out. And after you have analyzed it, then, if you find that it will do good to one and all, believe it, live up to it, and help others to live up to it. He works best who works without any motive, neither for money, nor for fame, nor for anything else. And when a man can do that, he will be a Buddha, and out of him will come the powers to work in such a manner as will transform the world. This man represents the very highest ideal of Karma Yoga. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
On behalf of the Vedanta Society of Toronto, thank you for attending today's Sunday service. Special thanks to Swami Vidyanathananda for his incisive talk today. Now for our upcoming programs. The Friday scripture class will be on the 14th at 7:30 p.m. on the topic Uddhav Gita. Next Saturday, which is the 15th, there'll be the monthly vigil from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Next Sunday, the 16th, there will be immersion in Bhagavad Gita, chapters 1 to 3, through dance, music, and drama by Dr. Alakkananda and Troupe. This will be followed by Ram Nam at 5 p.m. The annual summer retreat will be now held in a different venue. The venue is Dante Alighieri Catholic Secondary School on St. Andrew Street in Toronto. Those who wish to register may do so by contacting the office. The registrations are now open as the venue can take more people. Please make sure you do the registration before June the 25th. Following the closing chants, please join us upstairs for prasad. Thank you.